Welcome to the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring intimate conversations with emerging and established musicians, recorded at the Gaslight Studios in St. Louis. And now your host, Aaron Perlett. Welcome back to the Loadout Music Podcast, presented by Wellbeing Brewing and Shinesty. I'm your host, Aaron Perlett, and today I'm honored to be joined by one of the founders of a favorite band of mine, Steve Gorman of the Black Crowes, who is now host of Steve Gorman Rocks on Westwood One, a member of the very solid band Trigger Hippie, and of course, author of Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes. Steve, thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure, man. Happy to be here.
So I have so much that I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
As soon as your book came out, I gobbled that thing up and just, I'm not a huge reader, and I just flew through that book because I was fascinated by it. And, I've heard you do a couple follow-up interviews on it. But, I think first I'd love to just take a step back and just talk a little bit about your career. I know you spent most of your life growing up in Kentucky. I think you were born in Maryland. But then you ultimately moved down to Atlanta to join a buddy of yours, Clint Steele.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys ended up in a band called My Merry Hope, right?
Marry My Hope.
Marry My Hope, rather, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where you ultimately met when you moved to Atlanta, the Robinson Brothers, and,
Mm-hmm.
Began developing kind of a, creative partnership where you ultimately joined Mr. Crow's Garden.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Clint and I had gone to high school in Kentucky together, and he was originally from Atlanta. So he had moved back home. And that was the master plan for a while. Clint and I always wanted to do something together. When he finally was ready to commit and asked me to join him, I just jumped at the chance. And he knew Sven Pippian, who later was a longtime bassist for the Black Crowes. So the first band I was in was Clint and this guy Sven. And then I had a buddy from college that I dragged down along with me to be our singer. So it was two guys from Western Kentucky University and two guys from Atlanta, Georgia, meeting to start a band. And we all moved into a house together. And our fifth roommate in the house was Chris Robinson. Clint and Sven were already friends with Chris. So yeah, I moved to Atlanta to start a band. And then I met Chris the day I got there. In fact, he picked me up at the bus station. So right from the literal moment I got to Atlanta, Georgia, I knew Chris, and we were living in a house together.
Have you been, I think that to a degree, you kind of outside of your radio show, you had a relatively anonymous profile, because the Robinson Brothers, as it related to the Black Crowes over the past 20, 30 years, have really kind of sucked up all the air in the room. Mm-hmm. Were you surprised at the reaction this book has gotten?
I haven't been that surprised. I'm not really sure what the reaction is, as far as probably the way you're describing it. You have more of a thought on that than I would, I'm sure. It's not unlike an album, which is you spend a lot of time on it. Once it's released to the world, it's kind of out of your hands, and you let it go in that way. The book was just like an album. The book was incredibly precious to me up until the day it was released. And then it's kind of like, okay, that's over now. Now I'll promote it forever, and I'll talk about it forever. But my concern and my, the commitment to making it all I can make it, that's all in the past. And so I've kind of moved on in that regard. I've not been surprised by, the only thing I have been surprised by, I should say, has been the reaction from people in and around the Black Crowes world. I didn't think anybody not named Robinson would have any real problems with it. I did and I knew that everybody would recognize that it's a true accounting. But the thing that was surprising to me, and a very pleasant surprise, was how many folks from, and I just don't mean the other band members, but crew members and management and record company people, radio people, people from all over the industry, promoters and promoter reps. I heard from dozens and dozens of people thanking me for it and saying, oddly enough, it gave them a lot of closure. I heard the word closure from dozens of people. The Black Crowes was a great band, and the music speaks for itself. The experience of being in and around the Black Crowes was not very positive for a lot of people. And those, I was really surprised and happy that it gave so many people that sense of okay, I'm not the only one, or this wasn't just me not understanding it. This was a pretty crazy experience, and that was a weird world. And so to get that, I do feel it's almost like humbling to have people reach out to me after 20, sometimes 25 years and go, man, thank you. I have no idea how much I needed this book. So that, that was a surprise, and that's been really gratifying. As far as what fans of the band think, I know it can be a difficult read for people who love the band. And I know that I tend to pay a little more, if I'm going to think about a review or something, somebody's commenting on the book, I take the things people say a little more to heart when they say, I was never even a fan of the band, but, because not having preconceived notions of a book is probably a better way to read a book. And I think people that aren't fans pick up on the story of that. It's a story about me and the people I worked with, and sort of my journey. And it is my perspective on things. Whereas fans have an awful lot of subconscious expectations that are probably not going to be met by the book. And a lot of real diehard fans can be disappointed, or in fact really upset by some of the things in the book. But that was not the point of my writing it at all.
Yeah, I think by the reaction to it, I more meant how it has been so widely consumed. I mean, this thing was everywhere you looked, in, whether it's music circles or just even people who were casually aware of the band were aware of this book. And so I think I meant not necessarily the negativity or positivity associated with it, but just how it became kind of a, it's been a thing since it's a really it's a really well written book, but
thanks.
But beyond that, it's a pretty remarkable story.
Yeah. I mean, I know the publisher is really I don't think they were expecting it to do so quite so well. I really haven't thought about it in those terms. Whatever I was anticipating or expecting, like I say, the minute it was released, whatever I had been thinking about consciously or subconsciously kind of went away, because now it's just what it is. And again, I can only say, just like an album, I don't think about what it means to other people. I appreciate when people like it, but that's not a way I want to spend my time. You know what I mean? There's a zero-sum game to really put a whole lot of effort into trying to figure out what it really means to everybody, or to even to anybody else, really. It's there for anybody that wants it. And that was my job to do on this book. Just like with an album, you put it out, and then you just got to say goodbye to the personal connection as soon as it's released to the world.
Yeah. And that, I could feel that in the pages of the book, that you were done. That that this was your past, and I kept thinking to myself, how does he do this? It's like he turned us, because we all hold on to things from our past. I think about my kids and the things I did wrong 10 years ago in raising my kids, but it seems like you did a really effective job of just saying, I'm done with that. That chapter of my life is done, and I've got these other things going on. I'm pretty satisfied right now.
Well, it was a really long time coming. You know what I mean? I wanted to be done in 1997. I tried to be done in 99, and then I was done in 01, and then I went back. It was a bit of a ping pong ball experience for me. So it was just a question of me getting to a place. My goals, my motivations for staying in the band or returning to the band, and trying to maintain a band's legacy, those things changed over the years. I was adapting. The second act of the band was really all about me adapting and looking at it from a very different angle on what it meant to me and how important it was in my life, and where the lines between the band and my personal life really are, what I'm willing to invest and commit, and how much I trust my partners to be worthy of being my partners. Those things all changed tremendously over the years. So it was a long process. And so, like right now, the band to me is 7 years in my rear view. The last tour I ever did finished, it's coming up on 7 years ago. And that's a really long time, when 7 years ago I was ready for it to end. Like when it finally officially, to me, blew up in the spring of 14, that was almost like a formality. I wanted the band to be over. I wanted there to be a farewell tour. But I had already let it go. I mean, I had let the band go as far as how it identified me as a person or as a musician or anything. It was just something all I wanted to do was put a bow on a very untidy package and see if we could just get the last chapter right, so that we could walk away with our heads up high and go, hey, we did the best we could, and at least we finished strong. All I ever wanted to do was run a final lap with some cohesion, and that was impossible always. And so the final straw, like when it did end at the end of 14, I didn't miss a beat. I didn't mourn the loss of the band. I had already done that slowly over time. I think there's a thing called anticipatory grief. When you're dealing with a terminal illness, you prepare yourself for years and years. You're not prepared for the moment that someone's heart stops beating, or in this case, a band, but the shock and the impact isn't there. It's just the acceptance of a thing you knew was coming for a really long time. And so to get some momentum going in a new direction doesn't take long at all. I had already started on my national sports talk radio show. The band broke up. Chris demanded all the money. I was like, oh man, okay. I was busy. I had a record to put out that year, and I had a radio show to figure out how I was going to do. I was in over my head with a new endeavor when the Black Rose blew up, so I had plenty to focus on. Which is not to say I didn't mourn it, but it was something I had been preparing for years. It didn't break up, or it didn't end according to my preferred timetable, but I always knew that was how it was going to end.
And I think
I always knew it was going to end. It just happened a year and a half sooner than I would have preferred. That's all.
And if I recall correctly, wasn't the last straw, you said when Chris wanted all the money, wasn't it like a fax or something like that to your manager that basically said,
it was an email.
Yeah, Chris gets 90% of all revenues from this tour or something like that.
It was, just to put it in context, we finished the tour in 2013, and the whole point of even doing that tour was just to set up 2015, a 25th anniversary of our first album tour. We spent the year plotting and planning it out. We spent the year of 2013 on the road talking about and planning 2015. 2015 was supposed to be 25 years. Thank you to everybody. Goodbye. One last run. For a lot of reasons. We wanted to thank all of the fans who had kept us there for 25 years. We wanted to pay tribute to whatever legacy we were going to leave behind by finally doing something right. And we wanted to, I thought it would be smart that, I like the idea of us saying thank you to each other. Like, hey, this hasn't been pretty, but we did it. Let's shake hands and move on with the rest of our lives. I mean, I know they're broken up as well as REM. You know what I mean? They made a decision. They stuck to it. They shook hands. They put out a press release, done. And the Black Crowes were never going to have anything close to a career as intelligently run and designed as REM's, but we could have finished it better. And so I was hoping to do that. I just wanted one last chance to a little more ballast on the boat. You know what I mean? Just steady the whole arc a little bit. But when that became impossible, because Chris did say, okay, I'll do the final tour, but I need to shake up the entire way we've been dividing money for almost 30 years. He demanded 75% of all the money of the band, and actually demanded I be taken out of the partnership. He wanted to split the money with his brother 75-25 and just give me a salary. And really, it made it easy for me. When someone after 27 years sends that email, it's very easy, or it certainly was for me, to think, oh, I'll never be in a room with that person again. Okay, cool. Let's get busy. I got other shit to do. And that's exactly what happened.
It seems like, and I, if I recall correctly, you kind of set this up in the beginning of the book. The theme of the book is almost, to a degree, opportunity lost. And you reinforce that throughout the book of these behaviors by both of the Robinson brothers. Because I went into the book thinking, well, Chris Robinson's a dick and Rich is just there. But as you go through these different narratives and the stories of your time with them and through the band, you realize that both of them had some very challenging issues that really hurt the dynamics of the band and the relationship within it, but also the opportunities you continued to lose over and over and over again.
Yeah, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory was that could have also been the title of the book. We were really good at that. We were a 90-yard band in a 100-yard world. You know what I mean? It was just, and it was there from the beginning. It was there as a local band. We constantly followed great moments that opened doors with, by then torching that opportunity. It was always there. It was something that I naively thought would go away once we found success. In my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, we've accomplished everything we said we wanted from the first album. Like when Shake Your Moneymaker was released, in fact, we went so far beyond our goals that we were in a complete alien territory for a while. It took us a while to catch up to the fact that we had sold 5 million records. That's not what we had in mind at all. But once there, it's like, okay, so we're playing a little bit of a different game than we thought, but we're all talented. We're all smart in our own way. Let's stay on the same page and let's figure out how to do this together. And we did have a manager who could help us do that, and who had proven his ability to maneuver us through the industry. And we still weren't able to do it. You know, there were fits and starts. There were moments when we were all on the same page, on and off stage, and the success of those moments always spoke for themselves. And I don't mean even commercial success. I mean it just as a cohesive unit, moving forward, not leaving question marks in our trail. We had those periods of time where they just weren't nearly enough of them, and they never lasted as long as the dysfunction that would always follow.
I think, you know, when I go through the narrative of the book and I think about those opportunity lost, the one that seemed to, I don't know, it seemed to have a real emotional impact on you was the situation with Jimmy Page, because it seemed like you and he had developed a really nice relationship. And then Rich Robinson just really kind of blows the whole thing up when, you know, Jimmy talked to him about collaborating together, and Rich is like, yeah, you know, nah, I'm good, brother.
Yeah, it was, and again, it's funny because that is something that's gotten a lot of response, and I've talked about that a lot. I never, it was, there's a lot that went into to how much that upset me. I mean, by the time I found out what happened, I'd already quit the band. You know, it wasn't like the kind of thing where I found out what had happened and I was like, I can't work with these guys anymore, I'm out. I had actually already done that. You know, I was already out of the band when Jimmy told me that story. But it just sort of, it answered a lot of questions that I had been wondering about, or it answered one central question, which is what really happened, or what was the final straw on Jimmy's back, which he did literally have a bad back. And Rich gave him reason to no longer play in pain, if you will, which he had been doing. It was just such an affront on every level. The one thing I never gave 1 second of thought to was the music that may have been created and what might have been lost musically. It wasn't about that to me. You know, Jimmy said, I've got some pieces, I've got riffs, I'd love to finish these with you and Chris. Let's write songs together. Well, that could go anywhere. I mean, a riff doesn't make a song. You know what I mean? I mean, the Black Crowes, we had 1 million songs that are full of good parts, but they never quite came together as well as they could. We had great songs that don't have a central riff. It doesn't, you know, all of it, none of it means anything until you get the finished product, if you will. So to think that Jimmy had parts, maybe he, Chris, and Rich could finish them. Yeah, that's a nice thought, but that wasn't what upset me. I wasn't mourning the loss of potential musical collaborations. It was just such an indescribably stupid thing to do, and such the lack of humanity, if you will, in that decision, and that the insecurity that it would take to look at Jimmy Page, who, and it should be stated, had single-handedly changed our career. I mean, he put us in a 180 in the space of 2 weeks. In the fall of '99, the Black Crowes were going nowhere. We were stuck on a label we wanted to get away from. We had very poor offers from promoters. We had just released our 5th album in a row of it was the 5th time. Well, it was the 4th time we released an album that sold less than the one before it. You know, our first album sold the most, second most, third most, fourth. So when you've put out 5 albums and the trend for commercially is just downhill for 5 straight records, you know, that shows up in ticket sales as well, obviously. So we were not exactly a hot commodity going into the new century. And in the space of 6 shows in the fall of 1999 with Jimmy Page, we literally did a 180. Suddenly we were ascendant. We were on everybody's mind. Record labels came out of the woodwork to try to get into a room with us to offer us a new record deal. And promoters went berserk. And then we set up a tour with Jimmy to carry through 2000 that would have put us in front of more people than we'd ever played in front of. And it was going to go all around the world. And it was going to lead, you know, at the end of that tour, had the whole thing happened, we would have been in a place we'd really never been before. We would have just spent a year on the road in arenas and sheds all over the world with Jimmy Page, and then with a brand new record deal, and with promoters all over the world reminding them, so, oh yeah, this band's great, by the way. And we had a chance to rebuild every bridge we'd ever burnt in the industry. That was what was going on. It was truly setting up another decade of the Black Crowes career with a level of, it would have put us at a place we had never been before, put it that way. And Jimmy himself used to say, you guys need a seat at the table again. I mean, in his mind, the table it's the round table, and there's only a handful of world-class, true, great rock bands out there. And especially by the late 90s, there weren't many left of our generation. And Jimmy took it upon himself to really, he felt the gravity of all that, and he wanted it for us. And he extended himself to help us get there. And so all of that is what went into my rage, which I, most certainly felt when I found out what had happened.
Yeah, and it's funny because in the book, it feels less like rage and more just abject sadness. It feels.
Well, yeah, it's underneath all of it is sadness. I mean, I will forever be sad about the Black Crowes. I have a tremendous gratitude and a great appreciation for all that was good about that experience. But ultimately, that rides concurrently with tremendous sadness over what the band could have been. And I did an interview. I told somebody, I mean, it's like if you're in the Olympics and you come in 7th place, you're still really good, but if you come in 7th place because you screwed your steps up and you were a gold medal candidate, you're never going to quite accept that. It's always going to haunt you. And the Black Crowes, to me, should have been a 30, 40-year world-class rock and roll band. We should have removed Aerosmith and Van Halen and all these bands from who's the best American rock and roll band of all time. We should have been in that conversation. I really believe we were good enough to be that. And I think we had the right people around us to keep us there. And we had great songwriters when they focused and when they worked with producers. We had a great manager. We had a great band. And that's exactly how it should have gone. And that's not what happened. So there's always sadness there. But again, 7th in the 100-yard dashes, you're still pretty fast. You're still faster than everybody everybody else you walk by on the street. So it's all good. In the context of my life, awesome. In the context of what could have been, it's always sad.
And now a quick word from one of our valued sponsors. Have you ever been the town drunk? Come on, give yourself more credit than that. At the very least, you've embarrassed not only yourself, but your better half at some type of party or gathering. And guess what? For about 30 years, I was that guy. This guy. Always too much to drink, always the worst. But I love the taste of beer. Not crap macro beer, but real beer. Which is why I drink Well-Being's Hellraiser Amber and its IPA. They're the only high-quality craft non-alcoholic beers in the market and a proud sponsor of The Loadout. Visit wellbeingbrewing.com and use the code LOADOUT at checkout for a discount. Now back to me doing my best to ruin what should be a great experience with our amazing guest.
When the brothers announced this 30-year anniversary of the Shake Your Money Maker, and I saw the promotional material with the brothers wearing like suit and ties and things like that, I'm thinking to myself, this isn't them. And then I hear them on Stern, and Chris has this, I don't know, new professional affect that I've never heard before, and new take on him. And I wondered as I was listening to this, and they didn't even ask about the book, which I was shocked that Stern didn't ask him about the book. But
that was very much a condition of that happening on Stern.
That was one of my, that was what I presumed. But do you think the way they've kind of framed what is now on hiatus until we were in a better place culturally from a health perspective, do you think that in any way was a reflection of that glow that came off the book of these, basically two asshole brothers that destroyed a great thing?
That would have happened whether the book was there or not. I mean, because everything that led to this tour happening, none of it's positive and none of it's what either one of them would have wanted. I mean, those are facts. They're not going to admit that, and they don't have to. And they have every right to go on tours the Black Crowes, truly. And if they want to go play that music, it's no skin off my nose. It's like, I would love to think that future generations will still discover our music and like it. That's what it's there for. But their problems with the book, they were both furious. Just the fact that I wrote a book, they don't have to know they probably know what's in it. Figuratively speaking, ahead of time, they weren't excited about that happening. And then when it came out, whichever parts they've read or had read to them or whoever summarized it for them, I'm sure they are absolutely furious about it. And they've made a few statements publicly, but very few. They don't want to put any more air to the book, so they're not going to talk about it. I think it's hilarious that for the first time ever, they're following advice from somebody who says, "Don't talk about the book," But they were going to do this tour either way, and they're not good salesmen, and they're both poor actors. So it was never going to feel the way anybody who's followed the band for very long would have hoped it would feel, because they're doing this for one reason. They've painted themselves into a corner financially. That's all it is. It's as simple as that. And had they come out and said that, it would have made the whole thing a lot easier on them. But that's never going to happen. They just don't. That's not how they feel. They will convince themselves of a narrative and commit to it no matter what. And if at the end of the day it does help them as brothers, great. I mean, the other sad thing about the band is that those guys, all they have is each other. They're, siblings are your life partners, and they just have each other, and they've spent 50 years at each other's throat. So if they truly became friends and truly had a relationship founded in respect of each other, I think that would be wonderful for them. But that's not what led this thing to happen. If they were both financially secure, you'd never see them in the same county again.
Yeah, that Stern interview they had was pretty remarkable on a number of fronts. In that, to your point, I think some of Rich's kids had never met Chris, but
yeah. And by the way, that's just sad. I mean, I truly say that there's so much sadness involved in that. And Rich has made comments about other members of the band and management trying to keep them apart over the years. They've got together, and I mean, he's said this several times. And again, that just makes me sad, because he's convincing himself of a completely false narrative. Neither one of them is ever able to acknowledge that all everybody ever did was try to get them on the same page. A lot of people, not just me, spent years of their life in the service of trying to get those guys to stay on the same page. And they became, their dysfunction was stronger than all the best intentions of a whole lot of really smart and talented people. And so that's why they are where they are right now. And they can hire great musicians, and they did, but it has nothing to do with anything the band ever claimed that it stood for.
One of the real interesting parts in the book to me, and if I didn't know your history as a band, I would have wondered if this was going to be a renaissance, was you cited a period, I believe you were in a hotel in Europe, and you kind of have this come to Jesus where you're sitting with Chris and on a hotel floor room and in the hotel room floor, and we
were in Tokyo.
Yeah, and you both ended up in tears, and you're talking about just kind of the pain that had been involved in the band, how you just wanted to just kind of move forward and somehow find a way that you guys could be functioning in some level of normalcy. Yeah. But it seemed like that was, again, if you hadn't known the history of the band, you would have been like, oh, this is the part of the story where, our heroes.
And that's the second album. I mean, that's the summer of '92. So that was very early. There were more of those over the years. They didn't need to be, there was a lot of stuff in the book that I wrote that we took out because it got a little repetitive, but those cycles all repeated themselves.
Yeah.
We finished our first tour for Shake Your Moneymaker limping hard to the finish line. It was 350 shows. And for the last month, we were all really, really in a zombie state of mind. And, for instance, we hated ourselves for it. And so, I made it a point. I can remember the last show of the Southern Harmony tour. I remember the last show of the Amorica tour. I remember the end of every tour. And I never got over the feeling of I'm never doing that again. I am swinging with everything I have until I get home, and so a lot of the cycles, the cyclical nature of the band and the band's emotion, it was just like a hamster wheel. We all went through these same, tour starts. You have this 2-3 week burst of adrenaline. It's all good. And then the same things start to happen. And, we're dealing with a lot of addiction. And if there's one thing addicts need, it's actually consistency. Every day is the same in a certain way on a surface level. If you know someone who's an addict, they will describe what it's like to pour a drink in 1 cube of ice for 9 minutes. It's like art to them. The idea of rolling a joint, the idea of doing anything, the process and the routine of it is something that's so important, to somebody who needs something to get through the day. And in a sense, the band acted that way. I was always aware of this. There were fights we had at soundcheck. You know, we would be, let's say we're in Buffalo, New York in '93, and there's a fight at soundcheck. We're in Buffalo, New York 2 years later, and a fight starts at soundcheck about the same thing. And I'm sitting there going, no one else remembers that. No one's aware of the fact that there was a fight at soundcheck 2 years ago in the same city, same topic. Everybody's subconscious was always triggering a lot of the dysfunction. And I would sit there and go, guys, we did this. Do you not remember this? And they all look at me like I was crazy, but I would remember those things. There was so many things like that, but then those things always led to good things. There was just as many positive, you know, we would all wake up in a town. It'd be a day off. And without discussing it, somehow 4 of us ended up at the same coffee shop because we had done it 7 years earlier. And like moths to a flame, we all were driven to these things, and we would end up having a good day. It's a short way of explaining that the tentacles of everyone's emotional commitment and emotional surrender to the band over everything else connected us in ways, both good and bad, that were really, really, really intense.
I think one thing the book also shed some light on was, I think Chris's destructiveness was kind of legendary, but I don't think a lot of people understood how equally destructive Rich could be within the framework of the band. The story you told about Rich taking the bus from New Orleans and heading back to Atlanta while the rest of you were out, just going out, it kind of crystallized that for me. That was the point in the book where I'm like, oh, Chris is just as insane, or Rich is just as insane as Chris.
Well, it's it's funny, the 2 times in the book where my anger is untetherable, you know, or both times that Rich did something. You know, it's like Chris just hit for average, and Rich occasionally hit a grand slam when you least expected it, if you will, you know. As far as the mood of the band and the day-to-day, minute-to-minute culture of the band, Chris obviously played a much larger part in that. His essence, if you will, his taste, his desire for the band to be perceived a certain way, that overrode everybody else at all times. And Rich was a very silent, at one point I wrote, when Chris decided he was a dictator, Rich became an anarchist. You know, Rich's whole raison d'etre was just to argue with Chris. It was Chris and not Chris was how it looked a lot of the years. But Rich had every bit of the willingness to do something that the average guy would never even consider, much less consider actually doing. They both had an incredibly self-destructive or band-destructive MO when it suited their immediate needs.
Yes, Steve, it's just a fascinating book. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking to Steve Gorman about his book. We'll be right back after this message from Shinesty.
And now a quick word from one of our sponsors. Have you ever wanted a tightly wrapped American flag around your waist with a giant bald eagle face placed squarely on your junk? Or how about a Steve Harvey coronavirus mask? Or maybe the next evolution of jorts in the form of a hot and sexy denim Speedo? But maybe, just maybe, you're dying for a pair of Kansas City Chiefs overalls or even leopard pants. Yes, 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 and most definitely yes. And it's all pretty easily found at Shinesty, the perfectly weird party gear website that I find myself escaping to every time I need a mental break from the miserable 2020 we've been having. So check out our new sponsor at shinesty.com. That's the word shine, STY.com, and use the code LOADOUT15, that's LOADOUT15 at checkout. Now back to this less than spectacular show.
And we're back with Steve Gorman. Steve, again, it's just a fascinating book that you wrote, and we're approaching the 1 year anniversary of when it was released, because it came out September of 2019. Any plans for this year as you reach 1 year?
No. We just put the paperback out in May, so it's available there. There has been talk, both publicly and then for us behind the scenes, of one day putting out a different version of the book, because it is. I did write a much longer original version, and so we are starting. We've had it in the back of our heads that at some point we would do a more expanded version. And I think now that it's, it is a year since release, we are looking at that as probably not a year from now, but within the next couple of years, maybe doing it. And we would want it to be a limited run, much, obviously much larger, much more content, but be able to add a lot more photos and a lot of different things to make it worth what a book like that would. You'd have to, it's not a moneymaker, believe me. It's just something to put up because a lot of people want it, but it would be an expensive project. And I would want to make sure if we were going to do that, it would be worth whatever you'd end up having to charge for it. If you do like a coffee table version of the book, a really big, I would want to make sure that we were working with the mindset of giving everybody a huge bang for their buck. So that's all just in the beginning stages. I have no, I would like to see it happen, so it probably will, but I have no idea when.
Has anyone ever suggested turning this into a film?
No shortage of people. Yes.
I mean, there are parts of it where, you go back to Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous, and, it's a lot of it has that kind of what you'd expect from that typical kind of rock and roll story about a great rock band, the rise and fall, and, the inner fighting.
Yeah, there is that. I would only be interested in doing something like that if it were the understanding that to me, the band is just a context for a story about a bunch of people, friends and at times adversaries. The band didn't meet in the classifieds. It wasn't drummer needed, singer wanted. It was two brothers, and then one of them asked his best friend to be the drummer, and then we went out, and every time we asked someone to join our band, we were like, okay, they're in now. We're like best friends. Like it was like a gang mentality in the early days anyway. And so I always viewed the band through that lens. I never wanted to be in a band where it was just to get, like I said, I didn't answer a want ad, and we didn't sit down and plot out a course together. We threw ourselves into something with no plan B. And that's the kind of, it's that kind of commitment that it's a huge plus in the early days. You've got to all share an absolute denial about the prospects that you're facing. It's a quest. That's really what it is. It's a mission from God. It's how we looked at it. and that's a really powerful tool. And then once you accomplish the first few steps of what of the goals you've established, what we were never able to do is take some separation and distance and sit there and go, okay, well, hang on. Now that we're 30, what do we really mean? Like what are our priorities now? And what are our actual values? And what is it we're all hoping to accomplish? And is the Venn diagram where everybody's interests and hopes and dreams in the middle, is there enough of that common ground to move this thing forward? A lot of bands actually do that. We never did. We just kept chasing our own tail and running without a grand design, despite the efforts of Pete Angelis, our manager, trying to put that grand design into our minds. Because anything we decided to do, he could help us execute it. And after 3 records, it was just impossible to ever get back on the same page. But to me, it's about friendship and loyalty and betrayal and disparate values and all of those sort of themes. So all this to say, if it were going to be a movie or a TV show, it would be important to me that the backdrop, the band part is really the backdrop. It could, like The Sopranos really isn't a mafia show. You know what I mean? Mm. And I don't think Hard to Handle is really a story about a band as much as it's not a story about the band that the people knew. It's a story about the band that I was a part of, which was also a gang, which was also a family.
Well, and you get a sense of that family because there are anecdotes about playing basketball together and you spending time with the Robinsons' parents. And
of course, yeah.
I mean, you feel that, and just the time you spent together, going to a bar, drinking beer, doing drugs at the place you were staying at, whatever, being together and having those shared experiences.
That's the early years, the local band years. It was all that. And then it really was that off and on while we were touring the world too, like there are literally countless episodes of people being there for each other when they are having family difficulties or, relationships ending and someone's just had their heart broken and everybody's rallying around that person. I mean, those things happened all the time. I mean, we had all those experiences. a lot of those things aren't my story to tell. You know what I mean? Like there was no point for those in the book, but as far as the mood of the band, I say in the book, you know, there was a very intense esprit de corps. That was very real. What we could never do is acknowledge why there was such an intensity to our relationships. And we could never try to get a hold of that. You know, the band, simply put, we all needed a lot of therapy. You took a bunch of people that had great intentions and all had their own issues they hadn't dealt with, and put them all in a room together and then give them millions of records sold. It's just a recipe for a lot of, it's a weird cocktail. And like that, and that's the case with most bands. I mean, most people don't drop out of the world and literally walk through life without a safety net to pursue a dream that they know nothing about because they got all their shit together. That's not what made, you know, I didn't drop out of college and buy a drum kit for the first time ever and do all that because I was like really all there together. You know what I mean? Like and like I said, it's a good thing and a bad thing. And you've got to be able to evolve and acknowledge that you're not the same person you were at 21 and recognize that doesn't make you a sellout. It makes you smart. You know, if you're the same person at 40 that you were at 20, you wasted 20 years. And I think for the Black Crowes, in a lot of ways, we were our own worst enemy at allowing each other to grow as individuals. There was a real threat. There was an idea of, if somebody developed their own life outside the band, it was perceived as a threat. Outside interests were always discouraged. You know, there was no sense of, hey, go do this cool thing and come back and tell me about it. It was, no, stay here. Let's all be, you know, it's hopelessly codependent in 6 directions, that band.
Do you think that some of the people who played pivotal roles, whether it's, you know, you mentioned Pete and we talked about Jimmy Page, but George Drakoulias, Rick Rubin, do you think they look back and say, what could have been?
I'm sure they do. I know Pete certainly does. I know George does. Rick Rubin didn't play a pivotal role personally. He wrote the checks. That's a pivotal role, but not one that we were involved with day to day. I would imagine Rick, if he is even bothered to think about the Black Crowes at this point, with all that he's accomplished, probably says, "Oh yeah, that was a good band that should have done more." You know, that's probably about as much time as he would have for it.
Well, and he did play a role in your name because, you know, originally you were going to be Mr. Crow's Garden, and I guess there's lots of bands with Garden out there, like Soundgarden. And
there was a bunch of Crows. Mr. Crow's Garden was just a name that was the original name of the band, you know, that I joined, that Chris founded, or that he named, but by, you know, around Atlanta, it was Mr. Crow's Garden. It was never what's going on with the garden. It was what are the Crows doing? Like people always, it's just the way it gets shortened in a way you don't know. You don't control. And so when it came time to, we actually made the album Shake Your Moneymaker. We signed a contract as Mr. Crow's Garden. We made the record as Mr. Crow's Garden. And in the 6 months between it being finished and coming out and being released, we had serious misgivings about the name. We were all ready to move on to a different name. It's very simple. When you tell someone your name's Mr. Crow's Garden and they say, what? You know, that happens all the time. You realize it's not a great name if nobody understands it the first time. You know, Mott the Hoople's not a great band name. I'm sorry. Because everybody that hears it goes, wait, spell that. What are those words? I don't even know what you're saying. Mr. Crow's Garden was not a great name to us at the time. So we said, well, let's just be the Crows. Let's just call the band the Crows. It's real simple. It's easy. There were already bands all around the world called the Crows, even some that spelled it with an E the way we thought we would. And so then it became, well, let's be the something Crows. We got to come up with an adjective in there, the something Crows. And so, you know, we had a list that we had made. I wrote I had a Sharpie on a legal pad in the studio with the something Crow. And I had a whole list. You know, there was the Stone Cold Crows. We thought, you know, somebody suggested that. The Black Crowes. Somebody suggested that. And the funniest part is nobody remembers who said the Black Crowes. It wasn't me, because I remember saying, that's redundant. What crow isn't black? That's stupid. It's like saying the white liquid paper. You know, it's like, okay, why would you have to, what crow isn't black? But that was all on a long list. And so that was the band thinking for itself. When the label caught wind of the fact that we wanted to change our name, they were all behind it. And as soon as they started pressing us to, we resisted and we're like, hang on, you can't tell us what to do. We saw that as total pressure from the man, you know what I mean? So we switched 100% and said, no way. And then Rick Rubin he got stuck on he's the guy. He wanted the Black Crowes. He saw that list, or maybe he had the same thought. Who knows? But it was around. People were suggesting Black Crowes, and it came to a head. We were in Rome, Georgia, playing a gig, and after sound check, I remember Rich was on a payphone, and he got a message to call the label ASAP, and he called and hung up the phone and looked at us and said that, Rick said that he wants it to be the Black Crowes. The label all thinks that's the best name. And they said that our international distributor said they wouldn't release the album if it was called Mr. Crow's Garden. Now that's total bullshit. There's no way no international label is going to say to a band that signed to a label they're in business with, you changed your band's name. But just to show you how little we knew, we didn't have the courage to call that bluff. And so we literally, at a moment when we were, I think it really says a lot too, because it's one of those moments when I look back on it years later, I recognized, wow, when push comes to shove and we're truly cornered, we'll play ball. We put up a great rebel front. But when there really are no other options, we jump in line, because nobody, called the counter-offensive. We just all looked at each other and put our heads down and said, fuck it, let's be the Black Crowes. And that's what we were from that day on.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, it was a good, I'm not beating myself up about that. That was an opportunity for us to, again, if as adults and as more enlightened people, we should have seen that as a really instructive moment. And let's be honest with ourselves, and let's remove a lot of the ensuing confusion and gray area about what our ethics and values really are. And we can go do whatever we want, but let's just agree ahead of time. But again, conversations like that don't happen with a bunch of guys in their early 20s. When there's fame and fortune dangling across the room like a carrot.
Fewer syllables sell.
Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit. I want to talk about the band you're in now, Trigger Hippie. And it's funny. I wasn't familiar with the band until you came out with this book, and I started digging into the band and looking at your music. And I love the records you guys have made. And I know this is something
Thanks.
you do with Nick Goverick, and you've kind of had a revolving membership outside of you and Nick. But
Sure.
tell me a little bit about Trigger Hippie, and is this something that's just kind of a side project for you? Your radio gig is like priority one, or how serious of a deal is Trigger Hippie for you?
Trigger Hippie's, it's very serious. It's absolutely a real deal, but that's a recent development. I mean, the long story short is Nick and I, the bassist, Nick Goverick, he and I started jamming together in 2004, right when I moved to Nashville. We met and clicked immediately. And like we felt like a real rhythm section the first time we ever played together. We both felt that, in a way beyond just a jam with a great bassist. I was really kind of connected musically at the hip to this guy right off the jump. And this is in 2004. So we would play around town. We would just set up at a friend's bar, this place called the Family Wash, and we'd go on Wednesday nights and just play for tips. And it was whatever two guitarists said they could do it, that was the rest of the band. The rhythm section was the same every time. I think our initial name was Hey, Hey, Hey. That's what we called it. And it was just it's a bar where only musicians hang out. So basically everybody would end up on stage by the end of the night at least once. But even from within those completely loose, drunken nights, Nick and I were like, man, we should do something. Like, this is, we have a foundation here that's real. And then he's also the principal songwriter for the band. So he's always been writing these songs. And the first time I heard demos he had made of his songs, that's when I really went, oh, well, hang on. We actually have great tunes here. Let's do this. Well, that conversation went on for years because the Black Crowes were on the road constantly from 05 through 10. And Nick he's a chef also. He's a restaurateur. And then he was also going out. He was playing with Mike Ferris and touring around the world with various people. He always had a million things going on himself. So it wasn't until 2010 where we really said, let's flesh this out. And let's turn this into a band that we could go out and play shows with. And when we did that, we were working I bumped into Joan Osborne and said, hey, I got this bass player. We got songs. Do you want to do something? And then, a revolving door of guitarists joined us. And eventually we ended up with a lineup in 2012 where we were playing shows as Trigger Hippie. And it could be, me and Nick were always there. Then Joan was on board. And then the other two positions were, like I said, like you said, a revolving door for a while. Jackie Green and Tom Bukovac jumped on. We made an album in 14 and put it out as Trigger Hippie. And almost immediately upon that record coming out, and it was very much like, it was like a side project for everybody. I wanted to move it forward. Nick wanted to move it forward, but we understood the reality is everybody's got very busy lives. This is not something anyone's going to be able to just fully commit to. I mean, I had a daily sports talk radio show syndicated at that time. It's not like, everybody had other things. But what became apparent really quickly was, my version of a side project was different from some of the other people's. Like I thought, well, we could still go play 50, 60 shows a year. And some people said, we can go play 12 shows a year. It's a very different thing. Luckily, as older, wiser people, we were able to acknowledge those differences pretty quick and still keep it very, it wasn't like a problem. It was like, oh, okay, well, we all have different ideas for what this could be. By the summer of 15, that had run its course. And we did well. We played a lot of shows, and the shows were great. We all had a great time. But it was obvious that Nick and I wanted to move this thing a little farther down the road. And so when the tour ended in the summer of 15, we just said, let's just get away from this for a while and see what we really want to do. Because if we want to build this up, we got to really slow down and make sure we have a bunch of people on the same page. I mean, my experience has told me in the Crows, like, an idea is only as good as everybody buying into it. And if you've got 2 or 3 or 4 agendas, you're not going anywhere very far. You might go really fast for a minute, but you're not going to get very far. And I didn't want that to happen with Trigger Hippie. So we ended up taking a few years away, because once you take 6 months off, it's really easy to take another 6 months off. It's like you get really busy. Nick and I decided to start, thinking about it again. It took about a year to find Ed Jurdy and Amber Woodhouse. When we did, it just made perfect sense. Like the older I've gotten way more patient, which is a counterintuitive thing. You would think I'd be like looking at the hourglass every day. But like I said, I'd much rather go somewhere together than and not splinter. So the goal for me was, if we're going to put ourselves into this again and try to maintain what Trigger Hippie as a band, let's do it for real, and let's put something together that we're all going to go make a real commitment to. So the second album that came out last year with a different lineup is very much in a lot of ways the first album, in terms of having a plan and having a desire to get somewhere together and to turn Trigger Hippie into a band that everybody leans on full time. And of course we were, that was the plan. And like everything else, in March, that all ended. So, Trigger Hippie, like every other touring band in the world, is completely dormant at this stage. But, slowly things are starting to come back around. There's some streaming gigs. We're doing one. Well, I can't. There's things that are be in the next few months. We'll be getting together and playing, masked up and in a small room for streaming purposes. The band is still very much around, and we're sitting on a ton of songs we want to record, and so it's just a matter of figuring out when it's going to make sense to do that, when everyone's comfortable.
And for those who haven't heard Trigger Hippie, you have a very unique style. To me, I'm a big fan of the War and Treaty, which plays a lot out of Nashville, and Buddy Miller's produced some of their work, and but there are a couple from Michigan. But you blend this kind of rock and roll and soul, and it's just got this great Americana feel to
Mm-hmm.
it. But it's a today it's so hard to put your thumb on. It's so much harder to brand music today, because music has evolved so much. I found, like the Black Crowes, you guys were a rock and roll band, and you were a phenomenal rock and roll band. But Trigger Hippie has got so many tentacles to it when I listen to Trigger Hippie's music, that to me, it's a great sound.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I think, rock and roll is inherently a melting pot. I mean, when you just look at all the original musical forms that all came out of the American South, that's what made rock and roll. People say, oh, it's country and blues, but it's more than that. It's folk, and it's Appalachian music, and it's jazz. It's all these things. And so I think that, if there's some similar ground between the Black Crowes and Trigger Hippie, sure, everybody had the same albums growing up. You know what I mean? I'm the drummer. Of course, it's going to feel similarly. It's like it's anything I play on. Every session I ever did in Nashville, everybody always goes, "Hey, we just made a Black Crowes song." I mean, I can't help how my feel is my feel, and that's just going to come across anything I play. But this band is, it's there's a that that give us an opportunity to go in a lot of different directions. I mean, there are songs that Nick sings that Ed or Amber would not sound right singing at all. And that just means we can go we can go a little broader because we have three people whose ability to sing, or they don't cross each other up very much. Like they all have very separate, they don't sound alike, and they also approach it from very different directions when they're taking a lead vocal.
Yeah. Well, even iTunes struggles to figure out what you guys are, because I believe their first album they labeled it as rock, the second one is country. I definitely wouldn't call you guys.
Well, that was a funny conversation. We had to assign a designation, and we said, "We'll call it country soul," and call it that. But that's what we see it as.
Yeah. All right. Before I let you get out of here, especially since your producer helped me get a hold of you, tell me a little bit about, you mentioned the show you used to have on Fox Sports Radio. Now you've got Steve Gorman Rocks on Westwood One. Tell me a little bit about that.
It is a classic rock show. We're on 5 nights a week, 7 to 12 Eastern, and then various time zones that play it. Obviously out West, it's delayed. It's 5 hours a night, and it's classic rock. So it's, and it's a lot of music. I mean, we're playing 10 songs an hour. As far as turning on the mic and having 12 minutes to talk, these are much shorter stories, much shorter segments, but it's great for me. Sports talk was fun. My sports talk show was always by design supposed to be a little different than the average sports talk show. I'm a sports fan, but I'm a musician. Sitting around talking about rock music is about as great as it gets for me. To have a show where I'm listening to music and then telling stories and offering whatever thoughts I have on a tune or a band or an album. I mean, that's what we all do all the time anyway, right? I mean, we sit around and talk about these things. So now I'm doing it 5 nights a week, and we're just over a year on the air with this show. So, and in radio terms, that's still new. I mean, you always feel like you're a couple of years before you really have a flow to a show. I think we're already there. I think we're a little ahead of schedule, but it's a like any great show, it's a constantly evolving process, but we're having a lot of fun.
Very cool. Steve Gorman, founding drummer of the Black Crowes, author of Hard to Handle: The Life and Death of the Black Crowes, founder of Trigger, Hippie, and of course, host of Steve Gorman Rocks. Really appreciate you being on the Loadout today, and can't thank you enough. And also can't thank you enough for the music you were such a huge part of for so many years with Black Crowes, because as I mentioned, I am a fan, although your book made me never want to put another dime in the Robinson Brothers pocket. So,
well, cheers, man. I appreciate that you dig the music, man. I mean, that's I did have a bunch of book events, and people would say, the book makes me not want to listen to the records. And I would say, no, book, you can, like they always say, trust the art, never the artist,
Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And hope to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you, man. All right, see you.
Hey, folks, if you made it this far, and judging by our numbers, you haven't, thanks for listening to the Loadout Music Podcast. You can always find us at loadoutmusic.com and wherever you like to get your podcasts, like iTunes or SoundCloud. And of course, as always, thanks to Gaslight Studios for hosting us. Have a good one.